The King's Son and Daughter, a short story. If I am to be certain of this story, I take and write down from my recollection of situations involving two children, I shall soon relate with whom this wonderful, if somewhat impossible story to some readers. Shall I be more convinced of it happening, or will it be an episode that will soon be forgotten, like most fairy tales in our own world? I need not waste any time with postponing such magical circumstances that came into my hands and was revealed to me in a most natural way. My part I must play, for surely I take the test of its credibility. My long years in service to these children, while being a loyal servant to the King and the father of these two most important characters, for they also played their part unknowingly at first, and how they have changed. I must begin. The King who I served under so many years ago, and how I missed his timely jollity, his presence of mind, his ruling hand, his love for his people. He was the King I dreamed to know, and while in his reign to his queen, she had no children of their own. They were of similar age. The King and Queen were delighted with the news about two new arrivals, and their eyes shone with adoring love. The people praised the King and Queen. They even raised their glasses in their own homes or out in public, welcoming the two new babies. The people were genuinely happy, for here was a king that loved his people. Now, as the babies grew, such tidings cannot be continually offered up with praise, for life can get in the way, and troubles for people can offer very little comfort. Enthusiasm can run dry. People can forget the early promise of a child. Have we not all been in such similar places in our own very lives? As I sit to compose this recall of the past, those children in their youth, I joyfully remember their fresh exuberance, their wonderful beauty, true children of innocence. So I gladly put names to the nameless souls, Adam and Eve. I must pause and give a strange and amusing account of the genealogy of this family, as it is not straightforward. As names can have a sort of sin attached that cannot be removed. Most of us grew up with stories from diverse cultures. We get Adam and Eve from the Middle East, the first couple. My readers may be shifting rather uncomfortably when these children with identical names appear as brother and sister. It seems words have an unpardonable sin held against them. Now is the time to relate how these children came about. In the kingdom I was born into, the laws governing people were certainly not fixed in rigidity. There was freedom to marry and freedom to divorce, and even the freedom to remarry. But what is most special about this is the King and Queen were granted the same rights. So now I turn to them. The King, my friend, whom I shall say is nameless, was married in his youth. Yet while touring the Queen, seeing her people, a storm began and had lasted many nights. Within that time the roads became unpassable due to breaks in the structure, but before such knowledge was known to those who rode on it, the Queen's carriage travelled in a fated journey that poured out a senseless tidal wave of grief into the nation. It was a grief most distressingly observed. The king could not bear to a desire to have children of his own. So when after a year since the death of a queen, a woman sprang out of nowhere, fresh sense of hope filled our hearts. Yet it was not to be. She was unable to have children. But their love for one another saw their thought to adopt children. We have heard of, is there any room at the inn for mother and child? The king and queen showed there was love in the castle for two little orphans. Sometimes acts can be given a scoffing glance, and it takes boldness to be kind. Yet those suspicious cries were drowned out by the people of that generation. It was as if it was meant to be. The hurdle was removed from the paths. I feel I have said all I suffice to lay the background required to understand the nuances of this story I am presently revealing to you. So let us now begin with their children, whom I promise to share their adventures within these pages. Adam was fairly tall for being around 10. He was almost certainly a foot or so taller than his sister Eve, who enjoyed knowingly her brother stood tall. She thought it felt protective, and she felt comfortable in that. Both had black hair, but while Adam's was short, Eve was not shy of her long hair. It seemed to grow beyond the limits of sensibility. I cannot say how they behaved when they were private in their affairs with one another, but leave it to the experience of seeing them daily to describe their action within this story. Most of it comes from how they related these events. It was a strange sight to gaze upon when you are so expecting something different to what actually happens. A word about the castle. What a magnificent structure I ever laid eyes on. It rested upon a hill with an unusual flattened surface to which the castle stood. Although circular rather than the typical image that is portrayed, but with 4 turrets on either side, then a layer of fee, then on top of that 2 turrets, leading to a spire-like top. Either end of the castle had 2 giant platforms where the armoury lay for all to see and marvel at. This kingdom was respected. The rivals were quiet. The inside was full of an infinite array of rooms and land that passed in between was a fertile like nothing other. The mountain spread out broadly. It was certainly an anomaly. These layer kingdom. How can I best describe the lovable children? They did for sure cause those caught up in their games of mischief much embarrassment. Their pranks were never ending, and it seemed you could hardly tell if they were jesting or being serious until they decided to unravel what that particular truth was. I think it wise for me to express to those that read this what those fond memories have preserved in me. It will assist you in how you might choose to agree with my approaching story or reject it entirely as mere imaginative working. Was it the magnum opus of tricks they decided to play? For me, I tell you quite firmly with a no. I have walked with them, talked with them. I have spent time with liars, thieves, dishonest men, charlatans. They were not this of the latter group. One day Adam said to his sister, "Shall we play the funniest game on those we know?" And Eve replied, "I do love this idea of yours." So Adam began to offer up the plan of his for consideration. Eve swelled up in her face and let out a joyous exclamation of giggling outbursts. She even clasped her hands together, and they jumped up and down while holding on to each other. Let me see if I can make you guess what they decided to do by simply listing them. As you can imagine, being children of a king gave the opportunity to command others and give input on matters that they came across. It wasn't in the custom of this kingdom to create a chosen order of who was powerful, but gave the opportunity for unusual perspectives to be heard. Thus, this is why Adam and Eve had such liberty with the games they executed on those that fell for them. I include myself, but rest assured, it was not easy to laugh as it is now. There was the moment Eve spoke up about the party that was planned. Yes, she was right, there was a party, but she took it beyond anything other than practical. She claimed the king had now opened up the party to all the neighbouring countries. Letters were to be sent out asking that 2 members were to be given access to the tour of the castle and treasures. And there was the question, and answer session with the king. Those in charge protested, but their hands were tied. Eve ordered the huntsman to bring back something that had not been looked at. She hinted at the might Blaconda. Eve joked with Adam. It was a myth. Adam joined up by commanding the guards to bleach their uniforms and wear it to arouse the coming king of a distant shore and a new era of relations. That day was filled with frantic people busily doing their best to achieve what was asked of them. No one questioned them, since none expected such lies. They somehow believed people were actually very good, at least within the kingdom. That is, how did they escape when the king found out? They didn't, but since they were not at war, a lesser kind of punishment was given. The actual beginnings for their children started one night in the castle. There was silence. It was in fact the very hour of midnight. The children were laid in their bed and had just given up talking to each other, when both heard a voice that spoke their name. It repeated a few times. Eve opened her eyes and sat up. She never spoke. Then the voice began to chant her name a few times. Eve, Eve, Eve. Eve looked over at her brother and made a dash to reach him. She shook Adam a few times. Adam complained, as what normally he would do. Did you hear it? Adam explained he heard his name, and not her name. They both decided they should investigate together. As they left their room, both reminded each other the names were still sounding, but in a rather ponderous way. Eve believed, as it was, more of a sense that she claimed it was guiding her to a particular place. The coldness of the floor added something to which they did not like. They then stopped. There was an old woman resting in a wooden chair, silently knitting. Yet there was a white, shimmering highlight that appeared to be drawing this conclusion. Eve spoke without taking her eyes off her and said, "Is she a ghost, Adam?" Adam did not like the question. He wondered why he was expected to know. He replied, "Why ask me, Eve?" Eve felt a little dip in her confidence. She turned to go back. Adam followed. "Wait up," rang Adam, and silently as he could. They found their way back to the room and firmly closed the door behind them. Now at this point they began asking far-reaching questions about what they saw. As they were fully awake, they thought it best to deal with it right there. I am told they spent an hour going over that brief moment they had happened to catch sight of. They decided that we would sleep in one bed, rather than each being on their own. It had awoken a fear in them they had not bargained for. Who was most frightened, I could not say. So that was how it started. The night, or rather morning, that changed them. However, they said the morning they woke, all sense of nervousness had gone. It had apparently the early morning discussions and the sharing of bed that reclaimed their proper senses. There was no more apparent discussion of it, according to both their accounts, for quite a while, it seems. Like a discarded dream you visited 6 months previously. Then, as quickly as a passing woman brings a smile to a man's face, the curiosity got the best of Eve, and she began to sit up in bed. She looked over at her brother in the bed opposite, and she noticed that he was asleep as any other night. She noticed her brother. When she awoke suddenly from an impossible dream she had taken part in, Eve asked of herself, what would it do if I went to check on that old lady? Perhaps she needed company, and we turned away. She kept asking similar questions such as these, but never really getting any closer to what the actual truth was. She said to herself, I shall go now and find out. She rose with such enthusiasm, she almost forgot it was dark. She stopped and got her bearings and left the room her brother was sleeping in. As she moved through the corridors, the clever array of internal planning revealed itself. Sometimes she took a left or even a right, then a little quick turn leading to some other change, but always led to a specific part of the castle. As she approached the sacred spot of what she was recalling from that morning, she and her brother looked on that strange vision. She began to change motion and crept more stealthily. Or was it just nervousness? It is hard to be certain. Yet now she became braver, and her vision had now become concrete. She saw her. We must have seen her the first time. She sighed and walked in the room. The old lady, while knitting, looked up and spoke. Oh, Mile, A child! You startled me, my precious one. Why do children creep so silently? I do wonder. I'm sorry, Eve replied, in contemplation. She continued, Did you call me by name? It was all she could say. The old woman put down her knitting on her tired legs and looked up, saying, I did, my dear. I am so glad you heard and listened. I called your brother Adam, but I see only you. Eve didn't know how to answer her and spoke, My brother is sleeping. He is tired. The old lady spoke again. You are here. We need not worry, Eve. For I have only a task for you tonight. Before Eve replied, she added, Do you see this lovely shawl I am knitting? Eve answered with a smile, Yes, it is lovely. Did you achieve this all by yourself? The old lady chuckled. I have contributed what I know to it. It will soon be finished, just in time for you to use it for a request you shall have to do for me. Eve was perplexed. There was that word again. Task. What task? I don't know of any task, she thought. I don't even know this old woman. But she does seem friendly, and she has knitted such a lovely shawl. Eve spoke. I have lived in this castle all my life, and have not come across any mention of you. Why? The old lady simply nodded and gave a reassuring smile, like your favourite grandmother might. She then said, My name is Berwin. Eve put her hand to her mouth to cover up her laughter. Then, as if to justify herself, said, It is such a strange, funny name. As is yours to my ears, my daughter, she offered up. Eve felt a little silly. Sit down, for time is not on our side, and you must listen to what words I choose to speak to you. They are urgent. Eve never felt awed with this strange request. Trust can come from the most strangest of situations. Though the act of trusting can show signs of caution, and at times this can be a good thing, but in others it can be a bad thing. For if you remember, Adam did not trust in the voice that Eve heard. For how do we determine what is safe in where we place our trust when we observe that other people trusting in that same voice? Should Adam, if he was awake, wish to rescue his sister from what he could not trust himself? Eve was strangely eager. So began the old woman in her story to Eve. In this castle lays great magic, a magic that can bring both good and bad upon its walls, and even outside its walls. No castle, not even the multitudes of such persons outside this castle walls, can bear out the inevitability of such possible evil sweeps to remove from a land what you call beauty. Beauty is all around, but beauty is like a flower. It will not last. The land that we rest upon shakes in its eventual tumbling, but we have more to have hope in than what could possibly happen. You see this object, Eve? This shawl can hinder such mindless evil progression from happening. Its creation was in place at the beginning of this planet, so such inevitability could not happen. No matter what may happen in between, There was no permanency in the evil that lurks behind, waiting to consume whatever lets it. Your brother Adam was consumed by it. He doubted in how he pictured the world to be. He doesn't share the similar beliefs that you do. Eve stared away from the old lady with sadness. The old woman recognized her heart. But not even your brother will be lost. For even those who do not believe in our hearts can still be beneficial in our plans. Just as those who are not your friends interact with you in your daily life. So we do not judge people unless you are certain of your place in this world. Are you hungry, Eve? No, please go on, Berwin Riku, offered up Eve. Berwin continued on. Within this castle can build a bridge into another world. You have heard of the myths of fairyland in your studies, where you read about all sorts of creations that bring trouble. Well, there happens to be a real fairyland, and its nature is not too dissimilar to that which you read. A real myth, however, can harm you, and in your world you see how differently harm can be moulded. Just observe, Eve, with what you see, and what harm can bridges bring you, may ask. They can bring bad creatures, so we must bring armour to what we may encounter. For there is one creature that has been back and forth within these castle walls that no man or woman or child has been able to see as clearly as you. This creature is a small goblin, a creature so nasty you perceive how it could even exist. But all nasty things are inevitably vulnerable to their own dooms. Remember this, Eve. Believe in it. There is control in all this disorder. Now this goblin takes the essence of those that live and removes the hope of a divine ruler that is unseen to be behind our lives. But the goblin digs the core of a mountain we are surrounded in, and within each day removes the resources that the people of this world requires. Like a pirate stealing a treasure chest on the seas. Only the treasure chest is underground. There is a way to stop this from reaching a terrible end. And why you are able to learn of all the secret events that I am relating to you. Within fairyland comes a child like you, for even fairy creatures can doubt whether humans exist. We are all made of the one Creator. This child, a fairy princess, can wear this shawl, but you must take to her by crossing that bridge into the fairy world. In so doing, she will stand like a guard between this world and the next, but none can pass. For once the oar of this mountain comes within reach of this shawl, the oar will crumble and be useless to the goblin's purpose. This purpose you need not know of. It is not vital. Your brother will play his part when he visits me. Eve had a happy thought. You mean my brother still believes? Of course, Eve. Give it time. Grieving for someone that was once there passes, even more so with the Creator. So try your best around people as they may go through similar to your brother. Eve hugged the old lady with delight, and the old lady embraced her back, both in the knowledge of what had been shared out. When will all this be? for I am still not prepared. It will happen to you like a thief in the night. There you will be one moment, and in the next a field of flowers where flowers should not grow. Time is your enemy, child. Go and sleep and forget your trouble. Why worry? So Eve said goodbye and left to return where her brother still lay asleep. She hadn't noticed the time, but was soon sound asleep, and a new day was just beginning. Eve never mentioned what happened to the brother. She understood he had to find it in himself to listen to the voice. So they went about their daily activities. Then a week later, while talking to a group of extremely old women gathered together for a play, Adam began to remember that old lady they had seen. He shoved his hands in his pockets as he sulkily wandered about. Eve was busy in her craft-making class, so couldn't join up with him. It kind of troubled Adam, and he began his journey back towards the castle. As soon as he could lay down on a sofa, he sighed a little bit. Through the mental exhaustion of making sense of that old woman, he constantly had a desire of setting eyes on her. Would he or wouldn't he? He closed his eyes, and the warmth of the sun bursting into the room ensured his restful state would be superseded by sleep, or was it a quick doze? Adam opened his eyes as if he was being called. After Adam regained some sensibilities from being asleep, he was beginning to recall that same feeling, or rather situation, that had happened that early morning with his sister when they encountered the old woman. Whereas Eve went slowly, carefully, Adam rushed through the maze of long and short corridors, going this way then that way. He was sure of where he wanted to be. The room was empty. It was just like most other rooms he passed by. But he didn't care that she wasn't there, for he could always come back. He began to think. This was the middle of the day when they first saw. It was the early hours of the morning. He decided right there to come back, but wouldn't tell Eve in case she became anxious about what they witnessed. Indeed, he thought she may have forgotten as much as I did. The rest of that afternoon was slow, and it was near impossible to concentrate, but time had to pass, and it did pass. The hours went by, and eventually they were united in their bedroom. No mention by Adam of what he decided to do, and they said their good nights to one another. The clock struck 1. The boy sat up. Funny, I'd never been woken by that clock before. Then he remembered his promise the afternoon before about going back to see if she was there. He now stood by the final corner, before the very door that would confirm or give suspicion to his past thoughts on that room. However, he wasn't wrong, and he could not remember if he was surprised or worried. I have my suspicions like you. In the room he went and boldly said, "Hello." Berwin Riku wasn't shocked by his presence, but neither did she play her part like that of an old lady. After the introduction, she explained what had been said when his sister stood in the exact spot. I think Adam was relieved with the news he received. But what part do I play in all this when my sister has the greater task to bear? Questioned Adam. We are all one, whether that task is big or small, Adam. Your task is to remove the bracelet from the princess. Then her true light will appear, and then your sister can continue in her task. You work as brother and sister, as you have always done. Now go, for it will come upon you like a thief in the night. And there, with her final utterance, he obediently left without delay. He returned and simply went to bed. The days that followed seemed to fall into that usual pattern one finds themselves in. A continuous reprisal of ups and downs of interactions between friends and strangers, with thoughtless interjections of failed interactions between friends and family. The delight of being involved in something new that can bring meaning into a life certainly captivated Adam as he passed those days off in whatever activity he was driven to do on that day. And even Eve, in her own way, saw things similar, despite not being a true brother or sister, but certainly a true son of man. In man there was a unity of a special kind, and though many forget their past, or interested in their past, the truth is never too far away to sneak upon you unannounced, much like a parent would be with their children, and children would know from their parents. After days elapsed since the second visit to the old lady, the days turned quite naturally into months. A few or many months, I suppose, it doesn't really matter. Yet not more than half a year. On one of these days that followed, the king was in the middle of his many kingly duties. It was unfortunate that this day was particularly self-involving. Did he like it? I think if anyone was to look on the king in the middle of such activity, you would perhaps conclude he was in need of some additional help. But such as things are, people are not as responsive as unhuman things that man created are. Surely this is the blatant irony. When man creates as when God creates, man in his heart wants robots to work for him, while God wants free men to work for him. But back to the king. The king paced into an adjacent room to the room he had just previously occupied. The king was now beginning to understand the labours of his position he held, and did not care for it. So he, as all great men do, muttered. Muttering to oneself has a soothing effect on those lucky enough to fall victim to this trap, but a hapless place to be for the person that triggered such intuitive notions while caught up in their discussions. At the desired time, to the king, though unexpected from the position of the individual who had just now stood within 6 feet of the king, the figure that now presented himself turned out to be Adam. "What luck, my son? Stand ready. I perchance need you to gather yourself and go down to the library and bring back the books that have been put aside for my servant to collect. For at present he is sick, and your involvement would free me up now to return to my more pressing concerns. Just place them on the great table with this note." At that moment the king began writing about, not removing the books from the table, and left the seal of his authority on it on a piece of paper. He, when finished, handed it over. Adam left while the king looked on. Such obedience like this is not usually seen in my son for such little things, he thought to himself. Adam began moving through the castle and noticed the places he had never visited while living here. He thought how interesting it could be to wander into such halls, doors, rooms, but had to finish with his chore first. How curious I am to know, yet only until now have I desire, again thought Adam. Approaching his destination, that for presently would be the library, he was met with the usual reception and checks that go on for such a special place a library of rare books is. None. Nowhere has so much faith in the criminal mind to seek out treasure as here. Where is the flexible criminal to be likened to such as Robin Hood with treasure? For those that define treasure in individual ways, rather than treasure defined by how you wish it. For surely you would be a more caring yet prosperous criminal. Alas, the criminal forsakes kindness for their fulfilment of literal pecuniary gains. As Adam made his way into a place as familiar to him, he was met by a familiar voice. "Hello, Adam. Down here for your usual read." Adam rested his arms on the counter. The man familiar to Adam was standing. "Not today, Joshua. The king has asked me to fetch those books he said that were reserved for him. I am here instead of a servant who was taken ill." So Joshua got the books and held them tight. He said goodbye, and as he walked towards the exit, he noticed the table put out had some shrub-like tentacles wrapped firmly along the leg. He thought this very strange and was about to investigate when he decided, instead, to turn back towards Joshua. But he had nipped behind the many high bookcases involved in what chores were given to him. So he was of his no use to Adam. There was no one else at the moment which had to be said gave a more eerie feel to the situation. Adam looked on at the greenery that had now begun to appear, though when he stepped in closer, he saw hints of colour and what appeared to be petal-like shapes. It was as if he was standing outside in the garden. Then it withered and died. Had he seen what his eyes persuaded him to see, or was it some other frightful thing? The longer he stood alone, no help came to him, for the blind cannot lead the blind. As he escaped the unusual unravelling of uncertainty that was the anomaly that appeared in the library, the fresh air met him head on. He sighed in a way a kid sighs from frustration. He was still holding the books, and in a moment the recollection of the rest of his task came back to him. Then he would be free to deliberate on that strange moment he encountered. There was the table, and as Adam lay the books down and proceeded to lay the handwritten note by the king himself on top, there was a voice so familiar to him that called out. He turned around in relief. "Eve! Come here, sis. You might like this," started Adam. "I was in the library when I noticed one of the tables had suddenly begun to see leafy-like tendrils wrapping itself around a leg. Then it disappeared." What do you make of that? Do you think I finally went mad? He said, half jokingly. The truth is much closer than you realise, Adam. Knock it off, Eve, spurted out Adam. When one thinks, your mind thinks and produces new ideas, even old ideas. And this is what happened here to Eve. Eve thought about all that was said to her by the old woman. What was it she said? Did she dare reveal to her brother the connection? What Adam saw with what she knew now existed. The strange new world, the strange creatures, all this talk began to appear more certain of some relevance, some small connection to it. In the end, she trusted her heart and told Adam what she too had been through. Even though Adam was shocked, he didn't seem to mind, for he also kept a secret. He also had met the old lady, and only now had it all come flooding back as a wave hits the shore. Both knew something was approaching. Eve recalled, like a thief in the night. But the goblin will be no thief. We will be ready. Indeed, the signs were ready. Indeed, the signs were read and comprehended. Both agreed they would wait for the night, for Eve had to claim the shawl from the old lady, Berwin Raku. So while they waited for the night to unfold, they began to exchange ideas and ways on how best to remove this troublesome beast. Since they had no former experience, it was rather a bit of a hit or miss with their approach. But they did, however, conclude they needn't worry, since the old lady was confident on declaring they could do it. They did, though, ensure they were well nourished and would not be let down simply from a lack of energy. Still, they carried a lightweight snack that was not out of place for someone going into an unknown situation. Time was ticking on. Soon, though, the time copped up to the slight apprehension that was gently building. They were now in the vicinity where the old lady was seated. Would she be there? This was a question that was on both their minds. As they moved in closer, the air before them turned hazy, for it appeared to be pulsating up and down. The walls were breaking down and cracking, resembling what you would find as if some earthquake was happening. But for our two young children, there was no earthquake. It was like something that was cut away from the rest of the environment, what was becoming something new. Shapes that were not there before, because the wall was there, somehow intruded into their path. The shapes began distorting even further, some extending, some burrowing like support for something big that was to be revealed in that place. There was darkness, and here the children huddled together. A hand came down onto their shoulders and hurriedly spoke. "This way, children. We must leave before it sees you. It must not know you are waiting, for when it does, it will steal away into the wretched night." Safe from being discovered, they greeted each other with fondness. "It's really happening," Adam said. "You must prepare yourself, children. Here, Adam, this is your bracelet. Do you remember its purpose?" "Remember your purpose?" Adam nodded with glaring excitement as he put the bracelet on. Now the old lady turned the focus on to Eve with ever-quickening movements which surprised both the children. The old lady revealed the shawl that she herself had been part of its creative execution of it. The surrounding magic behind the shawl the children would not be able to comprehend. But certainly when you looked on such a beautiful object, there was no earthly reason that could justify how it came to look. She too reminded Eve of her position. And while the final touches were being applied, we here end the recording of no trickier part that to have ever played. It was the wishes of the children, now older, who were so adamant about what was to be said. The children did agree to say something about the old woman, though this was not the place to say those things. The old lady was visited many times, and even here, I suppose, their events could have been written down. But the wishes of the king and queen's children shall be adhered to. I owe them this promise. No such tribute came upon them for their deeds. They remained anonymous at the time. Perhaps after the passing years their names will be unmasked by some clever person coming across their story for the first time. It may even be you, the reader, that scans these final words. I leave you with an answer I think you are disappointed in not reading about. Did they succeed? This book should be able to demonstrate something, for if you are unsure of the beginning, no amount of descriptive end will convince you that it happened. My final words for now have reached the end.